Welcome to the PicaVoxel basic walkthrough video, in which I'm going to run through all of the new editing features that PicaVoxel brings to Unity. I'm starting out with a completely blank project here, and I'm just going to import the PicaVoxel package. You will probably get this from the asset store, but you'll be presented with the import package window as normal. For the purposes of this video, I'm not going to import the demos. There's two main top-level folders with PicaVoxel. You've got the PicaVoxel top-level folder, and then you've got the PicaVoxel folder and PicaVoxel demos folder. We're not going to import anything in the demos folder. We're just going to import the main PicaVoxel libraries. That of course comes with the PDF manual as well. So we're going to import that. And in short time, we now have the PicaVoxel project in our assets folder. And if we look at the create menu, we'll see that PicaVoxel now has a sub menu. And here is all the major entry points to PicaVoxel. I'm going to start out by creating a new PicaVoxel volume. This will be the function that you probably use the most. And so we're presented with what looks like a basic cube. You can see it's got a few more triangles than a basic cube would have, and that's because the cube is a voxel volume that is 32 by 32 by 32, and PicaVoxel breaks down the objects into 16 by 16 by 16 chunks when it creates the meshes. So what you've got there is 8 meshes of 16 by 16 by 16 voxels. So when you add a new volume, you'll see on the right hand side in the inspector section that we have the volume script, which is the main sort of parent script for PicaVoxel, or for a PicaVoxel volume. We've got this big button up here, start editing. Now I'm going to take you through all of the functionality on here, but we'll start off with the actual voxel editing tools. So at the moment, this voxel volume is in a state of it's kind of there. It's in the scene. It's ready to go. You could use this at runtime, no problem. In fact, if I do run that, you'll see that we've got our cube there. I'm actually just going to add a light to the scene as well, just so it looks a little better. And I may turn on shadows on that as well. We'll put them on high resolution so that we've got something there. That'll be fine. Okay, let's make sure we're oriented correctly. So we can see here our pivot point is down here in the bottom left front of the volume. So this will be 0, 0, 0 in the 32 by 32 by 32 array of voxels. And so we can now start editing. So if I click the start editing button, you're presented with the PicaVoxel voxel editing palette over here. And I will just run through all of these tools quickly. The color value switch up here, I will take you through that on a later video. You can switch between the two, so it's basically the mode that you're editing in. We want to edit the color of the voxels for purposes of using the voxels in your game. You may want to change the value of some of these voxels. The default value is 128 out of 255. But we don't need to worry about that for now. We're going to leave that there. I will explain those, as I said, in a later video. Here you can see the color palette. You get 25 colors on each volume, and this is unique to the volume. So when the volume is saved with your scene, the colors that you've got in your palette here will be saved with it. And you've got a standard color picker here if you want to change any of the colors, which you inevitably will want to. Below the color palette you see the 12 main editing tools. I'll take you through each of them. The default tool that we start with when we start editing is the subtract tool. So I'm just going to quickly use that tool in the scene, and you can see there that we're actually chipping away at this block of voxels, and we can quickly start to make a shape out of this volume. Now, of course, that's on its own, that's pretty slow. If you want to chip away a big area, that'll take quite a long time because it's quite a large volume. 32 by 32 by 32 is pretty large. So we might want to subtract a bigger area using a box, which we can do. The first row here are single voxel editing tools. So if I click on the add, the add voxel, attach voxel if you like, and then click on now adding voxels, and you'll notice that the cursor, as I move around, the cursor is actually sticking to existing voxels, and that's how the adding works, if you like. If you're painting new voxels, it works on an attachment system. So you'll actually be attaching it to the face that you're pointing at, and you'll be attaching the new voxel there. It works very well in practice. And here we have the single painting tool, single voxel painting tool. If I just grab the red colour, and that will actually select and paint the voxel that you point at. Nice and simple. So then we can move down to the next row, which is the box tools. If I click on the box add there, and I just click in this voxel here and drag, you can see I'm now painting a box of voxels. The cursor still works on the attachment basis, so it will attempt to attach the voxel at the face that you point at, or to an existing voxel that you point at on that face. So there I can fill that in, fill that in, fill all of these in. Sometimes it pays to just move the camera around to get a better angle on some of those. So yeah, now I've filled that back in with the red colour. And as I was saying before, if you wanted to chip away a larger section, you can use the box subtract, which will then allow you to subtract a larger volume or a larger area. And of course you could chip away a whole big area if you selected, let's say, a voxel back there, and we drag down to the front there. We're actually chipping away a whole big area there, which is great. And then of course you could start to add voxels back in and build up a shape. Now I'm no artist, so I'm not going to use this video to demonstrate adding a whole bunch of voxels in some kind of artistic shape, because it will take me forever. But I'll just create sort of a shape that you can get the feel for the tools. The box paint tool works in exactly the same way. So where I've painted all of these in brown, what if I wanted them in a different colour? Well, I can simply click and select a voxel, drag, and that's painting all of those voxels in that box. And it is doing a box, so it's not just the voxels that are sitting on the face, that is painting all of the voxels inside that as well. So if I chip away an area there, you can see that that's painted all of the voxels inside, which is good. I'm now going to just erase some of these for the purpose of demonstrating the next tool. Okay, so the next tool is the box select tool. If I click on that, you can see that I've now got some handles in the editor, and you can move these handles to select an area with which you can then copy and paste. Now, it can be a little tricky to use this tool because obviously you're sort of moving this box in 2D, but it's trying to do it in a 3D space. So the easiest way to do it, I find, is to just move around the shape and checking out exactly where you're selecting until you've got an area that looks about right. I'm just going to copy a small amount of this bit here. So once you've got an area that you're happy with, you can then click the Create Brush button down the bottom here, and it will automatically switch into brush painting mode, which we can see there. Select the voxels, or paint the voxels with the selected brush, and you can see there now that as I move the pointer around, I'm actually painting with that brush that we've just chosen out of our volume. So I can then paint that down wherever I want to, which is good. But you'll notice there, if I select a voxel that's at the back, I'm actually sort of painting that into the wall. And the reason for that is the brush is actually pivoted at the or anchored, pivoted or anchored, whatever you want to call it, at the bottom left front of the volume. So if I wanted to change that, I can do that with the anchor tools here. So if I selected center, all of those, the pointer is now pointing at the center of that voxel, the center of the brush, sorry. And we might want to do it at the back and bottom. So there, now you'll see that I'm not painting through the wall any longer, I'm actually painting that onto the back wall there. So that's the brush selecting tools, and if I do a box subtract here just to get rid of some of that, I can then come back to the brush and it will remain. And one good thing to note about this is when you stop editing this volume, that brush stays in memory in the editor. So if you want to paste a part of one volume into another volume, you can do that with the brush tool. Simply create your brush, finish editing one volume, move on to the next volume, edit that, select the brush tools, and you'll be painting with that brush that you copied from the first volume, which is great. There's the box subtract tool, which is basically chipping away at existing voxels, but using the shape of the brush. So it's the outline of the brush that you've created, but you're using it instead to subtract from the volume, as you can see there. And painting works in exactly the same way. It's the outline of that brush that we've created, but you're using it to paint voxels as well, and voxels that aren't active in that brush. So as you see there, I kind of copied a shape that had voxels on it there around those edges that weren't painted in. So when you are doing subtraction or painting, those empty voxels will actually be left the colour that they were, as you can see there along those edges. You can also rotate this brush around, so at the moment we can do that. We can rotate it by Y, and you can see that that's rotated. It will rotate 90 degrees every time you click. And of course we can flip it around the X-axis and around the Z-axis, 90 degrees each time. There's two tools there left that I haven't spoken about. That's the colour selection tool and the value selection tool. Does what it says on the tin. I choose the colour selection tool, and then wherever I click, I will be selecting the colour of the voxel that I just clicked. Now, one little caveat with this is that when you're selecting a colour, if the colour that you've selected exists in your palette, then that colour will be selected. You can see there I'm selecting the white and I'm selecting the orange, and it's actually flicking backwards and forwards between the white and the orange colour palette. Now, if I was to change this orange colour to something completely different, let's change it to, I don't know, this muddy sort of reddy orange colour here. And if I then use the colour selection tool to select the white, then that selecting the white because that colour exists. But then if I try and select this orange again now, because the orange no longer exists in the palette, this is actually going to set the currently selected colour to the colour that I just picked. So I'm going to pick that, it's orange, that white now becomes orange. And the value selection tool, which I will take you through in the in a future video, but I'll just quickly demonstrate that. So the value of these voxels is 1 to 8, which is the default. So if I pick that, I'll get 1 to 8 in the value box there. If I just quickly paint at 255, those voxels are now a value of 255. And if I use the value picker, I can switch between 1 to 8 and 255 as I pick out that voxel value. Switch back to colour mode, and I can still pick the value of the voxels even though we're in colour painting mode. Good, so that covers off the editing toolbar. So I'll quickly run through all of the rest of the stuff in the inspector over on the right hand side here. So the first thing you're going to do is stop editing this volume, which kind of finalizes the changes that you've made and saves it for serialization. In fact, let me just quickly go back into the edit mode there. There's two options there that are only available in edit mode. That's draw grid and draw wireframe. If I tick draw wireframe, you can see that toggles the standard Unity mesh wireframe on and off, so you can see exactly how your voxel volume is being constructed. And if I click on draw grid, that actually draws a very fine grid of all of the voxels there. Not 100% useful, but it does let you see the extremes of the volume, so you can see exactly sort of around the edges, and you can see how that volume fits in 3D space. So it can be somewhat useful at times. I'll stop editing again. The runtime only mesh option. This is covered in the manual, but I'll just turn it off anyway. Just click that. Runtime only mesh. The meshes have all gone away in edit time, and you can no longer edit that voxel shape. The meshes no longer exist in the scene. I'm going to quickly save this scene now as a test scene, and let me just open that in Explorer. So here's our scene, 23 kilobytes, and that's just that voxel volume on its own with no meshes. And if I then turn off runtime only mesh, we get our meshes back. And if I save that scene down now and go back to Explorer there, we can see that those meshes are taking up around about 220k of scene space. So as you build up more and more voxel volumes with increasingly complex shapes, the more faces you have in your scene, the bigger the disk space it's going to need for the meshes. You can set your finished voxel volumes to runtime only, and they'll be generated when you hit the play. So as you can see there was no mesh in the editor, but the meshes are created at runtime from the voxel data. So it's really just to save a disk space in your scene, and save memory, and it will also save time to load into the editor, and it will save time between entering and exiting runtime or play mode. So it's probably good practice if you don't need to see particularly your volumes in your scene anymore. Just make them runtime only. Just a good practice to get into. I'll turn it back on for now. So the voxel size we have here the default is 0.1. This is the number of units that each voxel takes up. If I just change that to 1, immediately you can see that that's resized so that every voxel takes up 1 unit, which is huge, absolutely massive. Let's resize that down to something more sensible, 0.2. Now, about scaling volumes. At the moment in PicaVoxel you should not use the scale, the transform scale. In actual fact, we actually lock this down in the editor, so if you try and change the scale, it will actually lock it on 1. There are various reasons for this. The main one is due to the way that the picking works in the editor. It requires everything to be at scale 1. But of course, you are actually resizing the voxels here. So instead of using the transform scale, use the voxel size. Now that does of course mean that you can't have oblong voxels. The voxels have to be cubic, which that's the whole thing with PicaVoxel. So you can use that scale. So as well as scaling the voxel size, we also have the volume resize button, which actually brings up a new window. It shows you the current size of the volume in voxels, 32 cubic voxels. And you can basically use this to make larger or smaller the entire volume. So if I wanted to take this up to 40 by 40 by 40, I could do that. Now this says fill any added space, so if I do that, it's going to resize to 40 by 40 by 40, and it's going to fill in with the I think it's the color white that it uses, or it could be that I think it's the first palette color that uses off the top of my head. I'm going to resize that back down. Resize that back down. Now if we were to make smaller, we can actually use the anchors here, which work very similar to Photoshop resizing with the anchors. If we wanted to anchor into the center, then we'd be preserving the middle part of the volume and bringing in the edges from the outside. So let's resize that down to 16 by 16 by 16. And we've actually reserved not a lot in the center of that volume. We can undo that. So all we got there was sort of the center 16 by 16 by 16 pixels, which there wasn't quite a lot there really to do. Let's try that again, but with something a little less, 24, 24, 24, and we'll do that in the center. Resize that, there we go. So we've got a few more voxels there, so it makes a bit more sense. And we'll undo that again. And of course, it doesn't have to be a cubic size. We can go down to 10 by 20 by 20, let's say. There we go. So we've now only got 10 voxels along the x-axis, but 20 by 20 along the others. And as well as that, we've got rotate tools. So kind of like the brush rotating, we can rotate the entire volume around an axis. So let's rotate it around the x-axis there, and it does 90 degrees each time you click. And we can rotate around the y and around z. And of course that works with a obviously works with a non-uniform size as well. So if we rotate around there and rotate around z, and we'll undo that. The pivot, as I mentioned right at the very start, the pivot is at 0, 0, 0 down here. We might not want that. We might want to have the pivot set to the center. Usually it's either 0, 0, 0 or the center will be the two most common pivot uses, obviously. But you can set the pivot to whatever you like if you want to have it so you're rotating around the pivot like that. That's all possible. But usually it will be a case of rotating it around the center, or perhaps if you were dealing with like a character or a vehicle, you would want the center to be at the bottom, sort of bottom center. So y would be 0. So that's perfectly possible to do that. Obviously, you can then use the rotation. You're free to rotate PicaVoxel volumes in any way that you like, and this still works in editor like this. So if we go into edit mode, you can still edit this down while it's rotating, which is great. Okay, let's reset the rotation there. And I'll show you the voxel scrolling. So you can use the scrolling tools to scroll along an axis. So if I just hit that, you can see that those voxels are being scrolled. So it goes off one end and comes back on the other. And you can do that by 1 voxel, or you can do it by 10 voxels to just speed it up a bit faster. And you can do it in the opposite direction. And you can do that on all 3 axes. Like that. Collision mode I'll be dealing with in a later video, but this is for when you're using Unity physics and you want to allow collisions with these meshes. So basically this takes either a mesh collider convex or concave and applies that to all of the meshes on all of the chunks. So if we do that, we can see that we've now created a mesh collider. That's a convex mesh collider, and a concave. Obviously you can't see a concave mesh collider in the scene, but that's now concave. Just as a rule of thumb, you should use concave for static scenery, and you should use convex for anything that's moving, and you would use that in conjunction with a rigid body. So you could quite happily turn this into a moving, rotating, physics-based object, and obviously as you destroy voxels, the meshes will update, and that will happen in real time as well. So if I start editing this down and just take away a box section, you can see that that collision mesh is actually updating, and that will happen at runtime as well. Set that back to none for now. And the last few options there, I'll just zoom in a bit for this and turn off the light. So PicaVoxel adds a 1 voxel width shade where it makes sense to do so. So you can see there around the edges of the voxels there's just a one voxel wide bit of shading there in the creases, and you can actually increase the intensity of that shade. Zoom out so you can get a better idea to make it stand out a bit more, or you can completely remove it. You can see how much of a difference that makes, and even with the shadows turned on there. I mean, with shadows turned on, it's not too bad. But if you were around the back here, maybe with where the shadows aren't, you can see the difference that turning on the self-shading makes. And you can see there now that you can actually see the edges a lot better with self-shading on. It does take a little longer to calculate the mesh when you have self-shading on, so it's a case of whether it's worth it or not for you. And the default for that is 0.2, which I think looks about right. The material here, if you want to apply a material to all of your voxels in this shape, all of the meshes, sorry, in this shape, then you can use the material here. So if I quickly make a new material, create material, we'll call it red tinted voxels. We use the PicaVoxel diffuse shader and we'll tint it red, and let's apply that to our shape there. And now that one is tinted in red, and we could obviously change the tint on that if we wanted to any other colour, or we could go back to white. So yeah, if you want to apply a material and a shader other than the default PicaVoxel one, then that's how you do it for all of your chunks. Otherwise you would have to go through all of the chunk meshes here and change on each chunk, which would be time consuming. Last but not least, we have the mesh only copy button. I'm just going to click that. You can see here I've got a new volume which says PicaVoxel volume copy. I'll just move that out of the way. So we've got two things that look identical now. Obviously this one is a PicaVoxel volume, and it has still has all the editing controls. It still is a voxel based shape. It still has all of the voxel data attached to it. At runtime you can get all of the voxel data. Whereas our copy, our mesh only copy, is not. It is simply a basic object with the chunks and the meshes. And that's all it is. So there is no voxel volume data attached to that. There are no scripts attached to that. It is simply the basic object. So you could use that exactly however you wanted to, and you're free to scale that as well. So if all you're interested in doing is using PicaVoxel as a prototyping tool, an editor, a shape editor, then the best way to do it is to obviously create your shapes using the voxel editor and the voxel data, and then when you're ready to put them in your own game, create copies of the volume as a mesh only copy, and you're free to use that in your game as you see fit. And of course you could duplicate this as many times as you wanted to. So that's a very quick and basic overview of the main PicaVoxel editing tools. There are some things that I've glossed over that will be introduced in later videos, such as some of the other creation tools, the particle system, and of course the animation system as well. That will be a separate video. So yeah, that should give you a good overview, and I will catch you in the next video.